July 2007. James Kane, CEO of Bear Stearns, one of America's largest investment banks, is enjoying a game of bridge at a tournament in Nashville. He has no mobile phone, no access to email. For 3 years in a row, Fortune magazine named his bank the most respected company in the financial sector. By late 2006, the bank's assets were worth over $350 billion. That is more than the annual GDP of Argentina. James doesn't know yet that 2 of the bank's key mortgage funds have already collapsed. In late 2007, the bank will report a loss for the first time in 80 years, and Kane will be forced to resign. Just 3 months later, the stock will crash by 98.8%, dropping from $172 to just $10. A bank that survived the Great Depression will be sold to JP Morgan. 6 months later, the biggest crisis of the 21st century will begin. 8.7 million people will lose their jobs, and unemployment in the US will hit 10%. The stock market will lose half of its value. This wave will cover the whole world. A crisis in Europe. An economic disaster in Greece. In Iceland, the 3 largest banks will simply close down. To understand what happened in 2008, we need to go back 9 years, the late 1990s. America is swept up in euphoria. Internet companies are skyrocketing. If a company is online, it's destined to grow. Investors are pouring money into companies that have neither profits nor a coherent business model. The primary investment criterion is simply having .com in the name. But in 2000, the bubble bursts. The Nasdaq, the tech-heavy index, plummets by 78%. Investors lost $5 trillion overnight. This causes a huge shift in how regular people think. It's no surprise that after losing money on digital stocks, people wanted something they could actually touch. They wanted something real, something safe. Then, the September 11th attacks happen. The country is in shock. It wasn't just a tragedy. It paralyzed the economy. Americans are afraid to leave their homes, afraid to spend money, and afraid of the future. The government is terrified that the economy will collapse. So, the Federal Reserve, led by Alan Greenspan, makes a choice. They cut interest rates, and they do it fast. Rates drop from 6.5% in 2000 to just 1% by 2003. For a regular person, this means 2 things. Keeping your money in a savings account is now pointless because it earns almost nothing. But taking out a loan? That's almost free. At the same time, Congress is passing new laws to make housing more affordable. They make it much easier to get a mortgage. In 1999, they also get rid of a key part of the Glass-Steagall Act, a law from 1933 that kept regular banks separate from risky investment banks. To put it simply, the banks where you keep your savings are now allowed to make big, risky bets with that money. But it's not just the government flooding the banks with cash. At this time, China and oil-rich countries are literally swimming in dollars. They need a place to put all those trillions. So, they send the money back to the US, buying anything that pays even a small profit. America becomes a giant money vacuum, and that vacuum is starting to spark. The result? America is drowning in cheap money. No one trusts tech stocks anymore. And this is where the hunt begins. Investors are looking for something that is safe, but pays more than a basic government bond. The psychological trap was set. Americans now believed that real estate was the only thing that never goes down in price. The government added fuel to the fire by pushing one big idea. Owning a home is a right for everyone, not just a luxury for the rich. A golden age began, but in reality, they were just building a massive house of cards. Demand went through the roof. People started buying houses not just to live in, but to make money. One day you were a teacher. The next, you were an investor with 3 mortgages. Prices were rising so fast it felt like you were getting rich while you slept. Banks saw this and realized it was a gold mine. They didn't care about the interest you'd pay over the next 30 years anymore. They only cared about their fees right here, right now. But a problem appeared. They ran out of good borrowers, people with decent jobs and clean credit. In any normal world, the machine should have stopped. No, not on Wall Street. To keep the system eating, it needed new fuel. That's how ninja loans were born. It sounds like a cool name, but it was actually financial madness. It stands for no income, no job, no assets, literally. You could walk into a bank, say you make $100,000 a year, and nobody asked for proof. These were called liar loans. Want a $500,000 house? Here you go. Can't pay for it now? No big deal. In a year, your house will be worth 20% more. You'll just get a new loan, take the extra cash, and buy yourself a new Ford. This message was everywhere. People were getting hooked on mortgages, convinced that debt was the new way to get rich. The peak of this madness happened in 2006. A major magazine named Angelo Mozzillo, the head of Countrywide Financial, Innovator of the Year. He was praised as the man who made the American dream possible for the masses. In reality, Mozzillo was the country's biggest mortgage drug dealer. His company was handing out the most toxic, dangerous loans you can imagine. The system was running at full speed. No, bankers weren't stupid. They knew they were giving money to people who wouldn't pay back a single cent. So, why did they keep doing it? How did they turn this trash into golden investments that the whole world wanted to buy? Welcome to our Wall Street Play-Doh workshop. I'm going to explain how this scheme worked using a simple example: building a house. Imagine we have two piles of raw materials. The first pile is high-quality, solid clay. These are loans given to reliable people, doctors, engineers, the kind of people who pay on time. But there isn't much of this good clay, and the market wants to build entire cities. So we take a second pile. This is dry, crumbly dough mixed with sand and trash. These are the ninja loans, debts from people with no jobs and no way to pay them back. If you tried to sell someone a single brick made of this stuff, they'd laugh in your face. But this is where the magic of financial engineering comes in. We take both piles and shove them into a machine called securitization. What comes out is a brick that looks like good clay on the outside, but is stuffed with trash on the inside. This is a CDO, collateralized debt obligation. Looking at this block, it's now impossible to tell the solid parts from the rot. Here's a key moment. In April 2004, something happened that allowed this construction to go crazy. The SEC, the group that makes the rules for the market, changed the laws about net capital. Before, banks could only build a tower, say, 12 bricks high for every one solid block at the base. Now that limit was gone. Every big bank could pile on as much weight as they wanted, believing they were masters of balance. Now for the quality check. To sell these blocks to big pension funds, we need a sticker that says super strong granite. That's the famous AAA rating. Does the inspector see the brick crumbling in his hands? Of course. But here's the catch. The inspector isn't paid by the government. He's paid by the builder. If he doesn't give out the AAA sticker, the builder will just go to the competitor across the street. So, the inspector closes his eyes and slaps a gold label on a box of trash. Who's buying this? Investors from all over the world. They see those shiny gold stickers and start buying entire floors of our Play-Doh towers. The system became a construction madness. The higher the tower, the more fees everyone made. The house looked bright and solid. No, you can't trick the laws of physics as easily as you can trick investors. In 2007, the foundation of rotten clay started to crack under its own weight. The smell of rot became impossible to hide, and the whole massive structure began to slowly, but surely, collapse, burying the global economy underneath it. In 2007, everything on our Play-Doh construction site went south. The massive structure began to sink under its own weight. The plan of buy a house, wait a year, and get a new loan was crushed by simple math. Home prices just stopped growing. And that's when the biggest trap snapped shut, the teaser rate mortgages. This was a trick where you paid very little for the first couple of years, but then the bait period ended, and your monthly payment doubled or even tripled overnight. Millions of Americans opened their bills and realized they couldn't pay. Suddenly, for sale and foreclosure signs started popping up on lawns in front of those Play-Doh houses all across the country. Here's an interesting fact. While officials on TV were saying the housing market was stable, professionals were watching the ABX index. This was like a pressure gauge that showed how much weight the foundation of mortgage trash could still hold. And in early 2007, This gauge went off the charts. Investors started to realize, inside those high-quality boxes, there was nothing but crumbly sand and cheap Play-Doh. But what did the banks do? The ones who created these bricks in the first place. This is where it gets cynical. When the bosses of big players like Goldman Sachs realized their warehouses were full of melting trash, they didn't try to save the building. Instead, they quietly started selling these bricks to their own clients, convincing them it was a great deal. At the same time, the banks were betting that the whole thing would turn into a pile of junk. It's like a builder who sees a wall is about to fall on the tenants, convinces them to buy one more room, and meanwhile, signs an insurance policy in case the house collapses. This is when the heroes of the movie The Big Short enter the scene. A strange guy in a t-shirt named Michael Burry and a few other outsiders did what thousands of analysts were too lazy to do. They studied the ingredients of the Play-Doh. They literally read thousands of pages of loan documents and saw that the bricks were empty inside. Burry went to the banks and said, "I want to bet that your Play-Doh pyramid will collapse." The bankers laughed in his face and happily took his money for insurance, known as credit default swaps. They thought it was free profit because Play-Doh towers always stand strong. But Burry just knew how to see the cracks in the foundation that everyone else ignored. In the end, when the system crashed, these crazy outsiders made billions while the rest of the world watched the disaster. September 2008 was the point of no return. The fourth largest investment bank in the US, Lehman Brothers, whose walls were the heaviest and most unstable, declared bankruptcy. It turned out they had so much Play-Doh trash on their books that saving them was impossible. In that moment, the financial world froze. Banks stopped trusting each other, not knowing whose tower would fall next. Trust, the glue that held the entire global economy together, simply evaporated. A global financial heart attack had begun. The global collapse happened in an instant. When the Play-Doh towers on Wall Street started to melt and fall, the echo was heard across the entire planet. This was the Great Recession. In the US alone, 8.7 million people found themselves on the street overnight. Unemployment shot up to 10%. The stock market crashed, turning the life savings of millions into dust. Think about this. 1 out of every 4 households lost 75% of everything they owned. People lost the homes that were supposed to be their fortresses, only to realize they were living in piles of deformed Play-Doh. But outside the US, it was pure chaos. In Iceland, all 3 of the country's biggest banks went bankrupt in just a few days. A tiny island suddenly owed the world sums of money that were many times larger than its entire national budget. In Britain, the finance minister later admitted the country was just hours away from a total collapse of law and order. Then Greece detonated, pulling the entire Eurozone down with it. And then came the moment of ultimate injustice. Instead of punishing the bad builders who made houses out of trash, governments around the world started pouring trillions of dollars into them. They called it a bailout, a fancy word for a rescue. Taxpayers who had just lost their jobs and homes effectively paid for the bonuses of the very architects who built this house of cards. You might ask, how is this possible? The world is in ruins, and no one is guilty. Lawyers call this the Orient Express defense. When everyone is involved, no one is to blame. Prosecutors were afraid to touch the Wall Street elite, fearing that the whole financial system would simply crumble to dust. Only one man, Karim Sarageldin from Credit Suisse, traded his expensive suit for a prison uniform, and only because he was caught faking reports. One man for millions of broken lives. But it was in this swamp of injustice that what we now call crypto was born. Satoshi Nakamoto didn't just create code. In the very first block of Bitcoin, he hid a newspaper headline about bank bailouts. It was a manifesto. While governments were printing monopoly money to fill the pockets of their banker friends, Satoshi offered the world money that cannot be faked, cannot be overprinted, and doesn't belong to any Play-Doh builder. Look at the charts today. Debts are growing, banks are getting even bigger, and those same trash blocks are back on the menu under new names. We aren't just going in circles. We are running, and it feels like the music is about to stop again. The only question is, will you find a seat before it's too late? 18 years have passed. Did we learn our lessons? In 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act was passed to limit the greed of banks. But by 2018, it was significantly weakened. And the most ironic part? Those same CDOs, those same